I think both the speakers have nicely highlighted that how much important is nutrition for patients with chronic liver disease. And I personally feel that food is medicine for patients with the liver disease. As the disease will advance, the requirement also increases and they're not able to eat food. The only challenge is that providing such a high calorie, high protein diet is very difficult in a clinical setting. And these patients would develop ascites, they'll be in the hospital for some time, in and out of the hospital. So the recommended diet, which she's saying 35 kilocalories, 2 grams of proteins, is sometimes very difficult to give. So, but then the target is achieved by giving them food which is palatable. Don't try to restrict too much of salt in these patients, because if you don't give salt, they will not be able to eat food. You should be liberal with fluids also, because you can mix a lot of things in that and increase the calorie content. With this, we'll open this session for comments and questions.
So I will just like to go forward from here, and it was a wonderful talk by both these speakers. I just had a few questions which and then we can go up to the audience. So the problem that we face day to day is that most of us as hepatologists sitting in our clinics, we will take a brief history, we'll advise the patient and the recall and like you showed a very detailed pro forma. So that means that every patient of liver disease should be referred to a nutritionist. That is my first take, that because so much can be done by adding your value and the way you will prescribe, but as a hepatologist, I feel we also need to learn when to advise, what dose to give, how to choose the right preparation for a patient. And again, like Dr. Sunil said, that there are a lot of problems with the palatability. Many patients don't tolerate these protein supplements, which we have to give because they are not able to meet that dietary, supposing they are vegetarians. So again, that problem comes. And so I would like you to highlight, how do you see, one is what score is easy for the clinicians to use in the outpatient, then the inpatient, and then the ICU. Which score should be used bedside to assess the nutritional assessment? That is my first question.
Okay. When the patient gets admitted for a OP, what we do is, there is a screening form which I showed you is common for OP and IP. It's MST, Malnutrition Screening Score, just has 3 questions. Yes to any one of these questions, that means needs a detailed assessment. That's the global most validated tool. So then they refer to us. When they come to us, whether it is in OP or IP, we do a detailed assessment, the form which I showed you. So not all patients come to us, but when they come, we do the detailed assessment. So that's something which the dietitian knows how to do. Collecting a dietary recall is only for them where the assessment score is very high, then we collect the recall. Otherwise, we finish with the tool that is there. So that's one part. In the IP also, we have a detailed assessment, but then it's an individual protocol that you all want to take as a hospital, as a decision. At AIG, every patient is assessed. It's not that if the screening is positive, you do the assessment. No. I have a team of 32 dietitians where we meet all the patients and screen for malnutrition and intervention ASAP. So that's important for us.
You mentioned about interacting with all the patients. For inpatients is something that can be done quite easily.
Yes.
But for outpatients, it's always a challenge, isn't it? My question to you is, before I get Sanjay onto the mic for his question, as a dietitian, what are the inputs that you expect from the hepatologist or the clinician to be fed to you before you can actually plan out a diet for a patient?
From a doctor's perspective or from a dietitian to really go forward, first thing is, of course, again, it's a setup again, how you want to set. What we have is, we have 6 dietitians who sit there every day in OP. Okay, there is separate dietitian who sits all through the day for hepatology, separately. and the recall is taken. So what she expects is, of course, she'll see the medical diagnosis and everything. We spend around 20 to 30 minutes per patient every day. And we want to know whether there is a salt restriction. If there is a salt restriction, how much of salt? Because not always every clinician does not write how much is the salt restriction. Just say salt restriction. But how much? Depending on that, we can say where all they can add salt or how they can add and how they go about. So the advice goes by what is the amount of salt restriction that you've given. If there is a fluid restriction, yes, you all have to write how much is the fluid, because we tell them how much is used for cooking, for example, for renal patients, if you have to take, and how much can be actually had as water or as liquid. So these are important for us to know. And then, of course, we talk to the family, we tell, so these are things which come.
Sanjay. First Sanjay, then.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I have many questions, but I'll be very, very brief. There's something about, nowadays we have started advising Indian patients to use desi ghee. And there are doctors who would like to say that please have a lot of desi ghee because it is good for you. And I also understand that in case the patient is not exercising, then that might be bad for him. What's your take on this OPD advice?
Okay. A very nice question, sir. Many have asked me on the same thing. What is more important primarily from nutrition point of view? The saturated fat should be less than 10% of the total calories that is recommended. That's the guideline. The total fat percentage is up to the maximum of 30% of the total calories recommended. So these are the recommendations. But when you translate into the diet, most of them think that 30% of fat as fat. No. 30% involves the visible fat and the invisible fat. So invisible fat is a part of food. Say you're eating non-vegetarian, you're eating the yolk, you're eating nuts. Okay, that's the invisible fat. Minusing that, then you have the visible fat as fat. The regular recommended quantity, okay, not for somebody who's in disease, but somebody who is healthy also, is 3 to 4 ml, 3 to 5 teaspoons of oil per day per person, which translates to 15 to 20 ml of oil per day is the recommendation. If you take, and we tell them it should be 15 because I know it will become 20. So that 15 ml into 30 days is 450 ml, approximately half liter of oil per person per month. That's the recommendation. How much of it all of us follow is a big question. So patients have to be educated on that. Within that, 3 teaspoons, if you wish to use ghee, yes, go ahead and use.
Okay.
Because that's the cultural background. I cannot tell them, they tell, no, we have to have ghee. Then I cannot say, no, the diet does not work. So I have to give them. So I tell them, yes, within the 3 spoons, if you are able to use. But do not use all the 3 spoons as ghee because of the saturated fat content. So that's something that we say. Like for some example, there are certain religious patients who come to us and say, we eat mutton every day. How do we? I'm from Hyderabad. So I would have many of them telling me that I eat mutton every day. I say, go ahead and use. Instead of taking 250 grams, eat 2 pieces.
Okay.
That's
Got it.
everything in moderation.
But is the fact that etiology will not make a difference? While like alcohol-related patients, we see more of malnourished, and that's said, where obviously desi ghee, and there's a study from our institute where we've shown it works quite nicely. But for obese set of patients who are wanting to lose weight, and because we have to put more polyunsaturated, so should we not tell them not to use desi ghee for the obese patients?
No, it applies the same. 3 teaspoons. See, whether your patient is malnourished or well-nourished,
So the
whether you
concept
use
of
desi ghee or whether you use the regular oil, the calorie content of the oil is the same. That does not change. The fatty acid composition changes with each one of them. So, desi ghee has saturated fat. So, you as clinicians tell me what is the role of saturated fat in somebody who is malnourished. Whether he wants to reduce weight or not is secondary. But role of saturated fat as fat in your disease conditions. So that's something that we have to think.
That was
It
based on
is always that research has shown that it should be a combination of monounsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and of course, it has to be a combination.
we should be telling them you take everything,
Yes.
whatever oil,
Yeah,
Don't-
they, whatever they
Balance.
want to take.
That's
The
all.
balance has
The
to be
balance
maintained,
has to
and
be
you can
maintained. That's
use
the
whatever
message.
oil.
Sure.
It's desi ghee or this olive oil also. Somebody would ask, can we use olive oil or mustard oil? Whatever you want to use, I think you can use.
Okay, we go
Yeah.
to the
Yeah,
next.
I have one more question. We stop branch chain amino acids when encephalopathy goes down. It seems like you have taken taken that thing away from us. What is your stopping rule of when the branch chain amino acids should be stopped? Because you're looking at muscle. You're advising branch chain amino acids nearly as a nutritive supplement.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So even if it is encephalopathy, so first of all, from nutrition point of view, we do not restrict protein because we know that there is decompensation already, there is catabolism, and the patient needs protein. So we do not restrict protein per se. In even encephalopathy, but the minimum protein, because if you look at Indian diets, we already have low protein intake in our patients. So that is not restricted. Secondly, when it comes to BCA supplementation is given with encephalopathy with several benefits is represented. So we are not taking it away, but we are kind of advising. It could be in the form of a supplement. It could be form of the milk product what the patient is receiving. So definitely BCA has a role and it should be part of encephalopathy as well, which is important. Yeah.
Yeah, two quick questions. One to Dr. Madhav. We were speaking about BCA, which the most important is leucine, which works via a molecule called HMB. So now there are a lot of supplements of HMB. So is it involved in your supplement, or are you looking at bringing a HMB supplement which will work on the mTOR pathway? The second was to Dr. Radha. You spoke about late evening snacks. So can you give some real world examples wherein you would suggest patients at what time and what would be the late evening snacks for your patients?
Yeah. So quickly talking about HMB, yes, we talk about mTOR pathway and in which the branch chain amino acid, especially leucine, is very important, which is converted to HMB, which is the second metabolite in the action. So currently we do not have HMB in our product, but for muscle synthesis point of view, muscle protein synthesis point of view, there are more papers and more evidence available on leucine as compared to HMB. So leucine is more promising, BCA more promising than HMB today, as far as we know the current evidence goes. Thank you.
To all the panelists over here. A decompensated cirrhotic has a limited lifespan, we all know about it, without transplantation. We are restricting this, restricting that, ye mat karo, wo mat karo. What about the quality of life of that patient? Sincerely, that's very important.
They're told to eat as much as possible and drink ample amounts of liver milk.
Sir, the balance has to be maintained.
Salt restriction.
It's no.
They have to.
So the balance has to be maintained. You can restrict salt. It's not that you restrict it completely. You can restrict
So,
fat.
yeah.
So
So I can just say from so with Dr. Radha and me being practicing dietitian, me before and now with industry, so I will strongly say that dietitian's job is not to restrict. We understand there are restrictions due to the disease condition, but then it is dietitian's job to put things in the right perspective and give the solutions from the patient from day-to-day diet. That is very important. If salt is restricted, it's fine, but then what more can go in the diet which make it palatable? So those are the tips we would always give to our patients, and yeah.
I think
No, but
SP,
there is-
as clinicians, when we advise, we tend to put a lot of restrictions. Don't do this, don't do this. But I think dietitian's role is to make it as palatable, as acceptable, and give a lot of options. And that is what probably they do. Make it easy.
Okay.
Yes, I have two questions. First is that when the patient is unable to meet the protein requirement, is it possible that the BCAA can take care of the loss of the muscle mass or sarcopenia which is coming? Second is a lot of information on leucine and its impact on the muscle protein synthesis. So currently we don't have pure leucine supplements available for patients with sarcopenia. Does that help giving, because a lot of gym people have got that? And to that, a connecting point also is that whether in such cases, how effective is, the combination of the two helpful?
Yeah, so I'll quickly answer and then pass it on to Dr. Radha. So from the practical experience and what we're looking at the protein per se is only amino acids won't help. You need adequate amount of protein to be given, because you look at mTOR pathway, you need a protein to, and the second aspect is you also need exercise. The stimuli has to come from exercise to activate the pathway and,
So
for
in
muscle
case
synthesis.
they are unable
So-
to meet the 1.2, is
Yeah.
0.8 met and remaining given from BCA also help in cases like that?
I know what you're saying. Okay, so yes, so we considered amino acids as protein. So it's part of that, but this is in addition to protein what is being given, which is required specifically to activate the muscle synthesis pathway. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Radha.
Yeah, as she said, what is more important is meeting the basic protein requirements first. Even if you're saying it is 0.8, yes, go ahead, or target to meet at least 1 gram per kg body weight initially, then BCAA does work. Of it, yes, leucine, because it has the highest conversion rate to HMB, and that is what is the main factor for synthesis. Yes, that does work, but exclusive only leucine we do not have for patients. But using BCAA is not wrong. But the recommendation is to be given only when the whole protein requirement is met, and additional to meeting the energy requirements. That's also essential, because again, that protein is converted to energy if you're not meeting the energy requirements.
I think we are running out of time.
So
Just one last question.
Okay, can I just ask one last question?
Yeah, sure.
Ma'am, what about the 100% whey protein isolate?
That's generally for the gym people, not for patients.
It is already added in most of the supplements which are given.
Yes, yes.
Then
you
why
can.
is that not given as option?
Again, yeah.
So whey protein is very high in leucine content. Yeah, so the maximum leucine content is in whey protein, and it is part of the supplement. So probably the next question.
The last question.
Ma'am, I had one doubt regarding A1 versus A2 when it comes to ghee. A2 is often promoted aggressively as being a better alternative. Is there any evidence with respect?
No.
There's no evidence.
Actually, no. Anything liver disease, probably we handle more questions. These we can talk over lunch many time. So no, we don't have enough evidence on A2. Please, this kind of not much of evidence available, be it milk or be it ghee. Yeah.
So if there are no more questions, we close this session. Thank you, both the speakers and my co-chairpersons. Thank you. Thanks a lot.